Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's panel, Rows Reversed, writing authentic or getting abortion storylines straight or right. I'm Enid Portuguez from the Writers Guild Foundation. Today, we are partnering with Storyline Partners, a nonprofit collective of cultural consultants that advise on scripts, projects, and writers' rooms across formats. They represent issues and community-based organizations to ensure nuanced entertainment narratives. I'm happy to welcome our moderator today. She is the executive director of We Testify, Renee Bracey Sherman. Give her a round of virtual applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's really, really wonderful to be here with you today to have this conversation. I'm super, super excited about it. Truly a big admirer of every single person on here. I also watch a lot of TV, so big fan of everyone's work and the way they've really thoughtfully portrayed people who have abortions on television, which is what we're going to talk about today. As Enid said, my name is Renee Bracey Sherman. I'm the founder and executive director of We Testify, which is an organization dedicated to the leadership and representation of people who have abortions. What does that mean? Well, I work with some really brilliant and amazing folks who've had abortions and are sharing their stories at the intersections of race, class, and gender identity. And they're talking about the ways in which abortion stigma impacts all of us, the abortion bans and barriers, of course, impact all of us, and how we can create a more beautiful world where people who have abortions are loved and supported as they access care. Um, One of the things we've also done is talk to you all, to creators and showrunners and script writers and directors about what it looks like to make sure that the stories that you all tell about abortion are accurate and reflective of our real experiences, and then of course medically accurate too. So we're super super excited about it to do that work. And so today we're going to have a wonderful conversation. First, we'll talk with Dr. Ghazala Moyadi about what's going on, and then we'll bring our other panelists on to talk about what it's like to talk about abortion on TV. What does it look like? So I'll introduce them in a minute, but let's start first with Dr. Ghazala Moyadi, who is a board certified OBGYN and the founder of Pegasus Health Justice Center. And I am so proud to call her a friend and a collaborator and just a brilliant person to learn from. So, Dr. Moyedi, why don't we talk a little bit about what's been going on for anyone who might not have been paying attention, or there's just a lot happening? Let's kind of sort through. So, take us actually back to a little over a year ago when you provide in Texas, SB 8 went into effect and basically just relegated abortion inaccessible in Texas. Can you set the stage and tell the audience like what happened since SB 8? And then also, of course, leading up to what we're looking at right now with the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey.
Yeah, so Texas, I'm based in Dallas, has always been one of the most restrictive states for abortion care in the country. We have over 20 plus years of trap laws, targeted restrictions on abortion provision. So even before SB 8 was passed, a person seeking an abortion might have to jump through 10 to 15 different abortion regulations just to be able to access care. And SB 8 and now the fall of Roe weren't even the first times in Texas that abortion care has been completely stopped. So in 2020, right at the beginning of COVID, our governor deemed abortion care non-essential health care, stopping abortion care in the state for the month and causing people to scramble out of state. So getting to September of last year was really a 9-month battle in the Texas Ledge, fighting against this bill going into effect across coalitions in Texas. And then getting to September 1st, really hoping that the rule of law would prevail. And unfortunately, it really didn't. So not only does SB 8 create a bounty hunter provision, so rather than enforcement through criminal means, it is through a civilian snitching mechanism, essentially, where anyone in the world could sue anyone in Texas that they think has aided or abetted an abortion, provided an abortion, or intends. Also, there's an intent piece. So it creates essentially this complete fear among medical providers and among helpers, and has, I mean, the term is chilled, which seems like something so like cool and fun. I think I was described in a court proceeding as currently chilled, but like not in a chill way at all, right? So that like it's stopping our actions because of the fear of what will happen. The law is it's interesting because it's very convoluted in that it shifts who has standing to sue, but it also fee shifts as well. So, for example, if a case is brought against me and I lose, but I can't pay, my lawyers are responsible for paying. So there's a fee shifting scheme that also puts fear in lawyers from representing people. So there are several pieces of SB 8 that are alarming. And, you know, when people from outside of our communities are like, well, why don't you just do it? It's way more complicated than that because of the levels that they've built into it that are all essentially illegal. So care stopped, other than up to what we call embryonic cardiac activity, for the most part. Thousands of people were sent scrambling out of state. Because of the COVID ban that I talked about previously, I had become licensed in Oklahoma and was traveling to Oklahoma from Dallas to provide care. And so I really transitioned my work from one of the only second trimester abortion providers in the DFW area, 7 million person metroplex with only a couple people providing second trimester abortion care, to going to Oklahoma to take care of folks from Texas, from Oklahoma, from Louisiana, from Arkansas, from Kansas. So the other piece that's really, I think that people might not realize is just one state like Texas falling doesn't just affect Texans. So Texas, we not only cared for people in Texas, but I routinely in Dallas would take care of people from Louisiana or Oklahoma. So what happens when people have to leave Texas is that it impacts care, clinic availability, and infrastructure for the entire region. Fast forward to May, even before the Dobbs decision came down, and Oklahoma fully banned abortion as well, making Oklahoma no longer an option for people from Texas or Oklahoma. So again, spreading the injustice outwards. And now we're at a full ban on abortion care here in Texas, in Oklahoma. And, it's hard to keep count of which states and what is going on. But as an OBGYN, it has been devastating for my community, for the people I take care of. People not only seeking abortion care, but people not seeking abortion care with pregnancies that they desired and wanted to continue, who face pregnancy complications. So really any person that has the ability to get pregnant or gets pregnant is impacted in our state from this abortion ban. So there's been a lot going on.
Whew.
Yeah.
Let's take a deep breath, because that is a lot. And it's so frustrating because I think it's one of these things that we were told would never happen. Roe would always be there, right? And we knew that it was possible because we've seen the crumbling that's been happening over time. You've talked a little bit about kind of that it is banned, it is illegal in a state like Texas and a couple others. So let's talk about that criminalization.
Yeah.
Obviously, you could be criminalized for providing abortions. Your lawyers could potentially be criminalized.
Right.
And then, of course, the people who are having abortions themselves can be criminalized. And of course, people can self-manage their abortions with one mifepristone pill and 4 misoprostol pills 24 hours later under the tongue, or a series of 12 misoprostol pills, 4 at a time every 3 hours. You can learn more at miffyandmiso.org. um, but I want to talk actually more about the language of this
Yeah,
criminalization, because a lot of people are saying things like they're going to have back alley abortions, or
right.
assuming that if abortion becomes criminalized, it's automatically unsafe. Can you kind of tease out the reality of that for us, and like what is the difference between unsafe abortions and criminalized or illegal abortions?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that, because I think it is really important for people to understand that abortion care now is very different than abortion care 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That now we have access to medications that almost anyone could take, 1 tablet of mifepristone and 4 tablets of misoprostol, or 12 tablets of misoprostol, and they can take those pills and induce an abortion on their own. That those are 2 different regimens for what's called a medication abortion, although they're not the only ones. That although misoprostol has been around for quite a long time, really that regimen or that understanding of those medications as a process to induce abortion didn't become introduced into the United States into the late 1990s, and mifepristone itself was not FDA approved until about 99 2000. So the drugs are not new, but they are new since Roe v. Wade. And so what that means is that even though we still need access to procedural abortion care in every single community on every single corner, that that the reality of illegal abortion now, for the most part, is very different than the reality of illegal abortion 50 years ago. That people can access pills, they can take them safely, they can induce their own abortion at home. And it's important for people to know that that is safe to do. It's important for them to know the information to do it safely, but people have been managing their own pregnancies, their own births, and their own abortions for thousands and thousands, like, right, forever and ever. And so getting the information and tools to people is incredibly important in keeping it safe, but it being legal or not isn't necessarily what makes it safe. Birth is legal in our country, and we know it is incredibly unsafe, especially for Black women. So it being legal isn't it being safe.
Thank you for that. And just a quick last question, I think, because I want to stick on this language piece before we
Yeah,
go to the showrunners part. Um, Language is always evolving, right? People are learning. We're learning more and more about how to talk about what's happening in this moment, and how our language impacts others. And I've definitely heard people refer to what's happening in this moment with references to Sharia law, being like, this is worse than Sharia law, or something like that, right? Or saying, we need an underground railroad for abortion, or, they were returning to the Handmaid's Tale.
right.
Can you talk about why these references are problematic?
Yeah, I mean, I, it makes sense that these are things that people like first come to think about, but it's important to understand, one, that anti-abortion extremism in the United States is very much a US born problem. This isn't something that I'm Iranian, right? There's a whole other issue with abortion in Iran, but this isn't something that Muslims invented per se, right? That this is a very much US problem that's actually rooted in US white supremacy. So there is a direct connection from colonization, enslavement, and the ways that Black and Indigenous bodies were treated, allowed to reproduce or not, to the abortion laws that we have today, to family separation policies that we have today, to the adoption industry. Those things are very much connected. And so when we say things like Underground Railroad, Sharia law, or Handmaid's Tale, that really erases that direct connection to our own historical past. They are ahistorical in their context, really. And I think also that for people that are interested in moving the pendulum on this issue, I'm hoping that everyone here is, but for people that are interested in moving the pendulum, right, that it's not it's important to make that connection, right? Because otherwise we don't understand what the point is, right? But when you understand anti-abortion laws and anti-abortion extremism in the context of white supremacy and white power movements, it actually makes sense. But when you just understand it as they hate women, it doesn't actually make sense, right? Why would white women then support so many anti-abortion laws and be anti-abortion extremists themselves? Will you understand it in the context of white supremacy, but not in the context of they just hate women?
Thank you. I was going to say the other added thing is that it erases the fact that people needed abortions during
Yes.
while they were enslaved, right? Like, let's talk
Yes.
about
Yeah.
that. Thank you so much, Dr. Moyedi, for all that you do. You're so brilliant, and I love you.
I love you.
So we're going to move to the rest of our panel. We're going to go from the reality of abortion in our real lives to what we see on screen and talk about how that matches up. So I'm really delighted to introduce our illustrious panel. First, we'll chat with Dr. Gretchen Sisson, who's a sociologist and researcher with the Abortion Onscreen project at the University of California at San Francisco, also a dear friend of mine. She's brilliant. We'll chat with Erika Swafford, who's executive producer at New Amsterdam. Krista Vernoff, executive producer and showrunner for Grey's Anatomy, and Paul Weitz, who's writer and director of Grandma and About a Boy. So, Gretchen, Dr. Sisson, let's start with you first. You've been studying abortion narratives on television for nearly a decade, and it's obviously been a very interesting shift. Can you talk about what do the data say about Hollywood and these abortion narratives? Like, what are the current narratives? Where did we start? Where are we now? And what's still missing?
Yeah, so, I think if you had told me 10 years ago that I'd still be looking at abortion and television in the year 2022, I would have been like, there's not possibly enough content out there to take up 10 years of my life. But it's been an interesting time to work on this, right? And we found as we sort of started tracking and looking at the content that we were seeing, and we went back retrospectively. So we went back to the earliest days of silent film, looking at these really old depictions and how the stories that we have told in our popular culture space have kind of always reflected and perpetuated different social myths at varying degrees of legality. And how they reflect like conversations that are happening in the political space in ways that are productive or not, right? Kind of independent of what the writer's intention might be, right? So like in the 90s, you see a lot of these portrayals that really are leaning into this like safe, legal, and rare narrative between a woman and her doctor narrative, right? And so you see sort of like the center on the doctor. There's also a lot of TV shows about doctors, so that you see how that happens kind of organically. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, right? We see a lot of depictions that we can kind of poke at and say, we're seeing a lot of this type of story. It doesn't make it inaccurate. It doesn't make it an unproductive story. They can be a really valuable part of the cultural conversation, but it does mean that there are all these other kinds of stories that are continuing to be absent from the cultural conversation. And so with a lot of our data, that's what we're trying to see is not, is this story good or bad? And there are some that are clearly bad, but mostly what we're trying to do is say, we've seen these types of stories a lot. We haven't seen these types of stories, that there are creative opportunities here for writers to continue to look at a range and a diversity of experience, right? So women of color stories are underrepresented on TV in every way, but particularly with regard to abortion care and access. We have actually seen an increase recently in the number of mothers that are seeking abortion care, but still not in proportion to what they actually look like in the patient population. We see very few trans, queer, non-binary characters and how abortion intersects with their lives. Probably the most significant for right now in this moment is that all barriers to access are dramatically underportrayed. And I think a lot of this comes from writers' desires to sort of show an abortion in some ways it's kind of low drama, like lower stakes, like we're going to destigmatize it by making this an easier experience for the character. But you don't see a lot of characters like figuring out how they're going to pay for their abortion, driving 10 hours. Grandma's kind of an exception there. Unpregnant is another great exception. This abortion road trip movie that I was asking for years. So we're getting there. But for a long time, the barrier that we did see depicted the most frequently was illegality. And those were in historically set movies. We haven't really seen that many stories yet. There was a Law and Order episode week and a half ago that kind of dealt with this. We haven't seen a lot of stories dealing with the context of kind of post-Dobbs illegality. So that's a lot of the work that we are doing, is kind of saying like, here's where we still think there are stories remaining to be told that can speak really powerfully to what's happening in today's politics, today's access environment.
I love it. I think it is really interesting to see, like, to think through what we never see. One of the things I am constantly like, how do they pay for these abortions? I always, every time I'm watching it, how did you pay for that? Healthcare's really expensive in this country. So writers, that is the one thing I would love to see. I'd love to see somebody handing over some cash. Please show how they pay for it. So, Dr. Sisson, you've not only shown or studied how abortion is depicted on American television and film, but you've also done some research on interviewing creators, writers, and showrunners about their experiences putting abortion on screen. Can you tell us what you found in that research and what, some of the challenges they dealt with were?
Yeah, I mean, I think we, to the surprise of nobody who's on this call, we found that there was actually a high interest on the part of writers and showrunners in getting this right. And particularly, we did these interviews post SB8, but before the Dobbs decision, so kind of over the last, between a year ago and June, right? And so I think people were kind of getting the sense of what was going to happen. And so appetite was really up. But we also saw that they run into like a lot of barriers in their writers' rooms. Like if they are not the showrunner, like then kind of those plot lines don't necessarily make it to air. And I think that certain shows are the exception, right? And I know Chris is here, but like, kind of the Shondaland universe has just reliably always given us abortion content. And from what I hear, they are intending to continue in that vein. And that's really exciting because I think that those are such like powerful shows that break a lot of barriers for other writers. And a lot of the writers that we spoke with did write about that, how kind of things had changed in recent years and there was more access, particularly on network TV. And then also people who are writing for streaming shows, like the amount of streaming content that's available, that's not directly accountable to advertisers. They're just like, yeah, we can do whatever we want, right? So I think that there are a lot of shifts that are happening just in how people are consuming and distributing content that are making it easier in some ways. But then we saw more of this gap between like intention and like actual product and impact, right? So one example that I like to give is you have writers being like, well, we're going to show an illegal abortion and it's going to be really dangerous. And I'm like, cool, great. But like what viewers actually take away from that is like, once you put blood on the screen, like that's what they remember. Like they're not like, oh, that's an illegal abortion. Good thing we have legal access because that makes it safer. You show a woman like having a uterine hemorrhage, all they remember is abortion is physically violent and dangerous, right? And that's kind of what viewers come away with. And so there were a couple different ways where we saw this kind of gap between intention and how audiences were actually understanding a lot of these stories. And so, and again, people who are on this call are like eager to understand what the impact looks like, right? And you are already inclined to try to figure out how to get it right. And so I think that, part of what we are trying to do is connect people with physicians, with attorneys that are doing criminal justice or criminal defense around pregnancy outcomes across the country so that they can talk really specifically about what's the legal environment in a state. If someone were charged If someone had this experience, what would they be charged with? What would the defense be? What would that experience look like for them? What would this medical outcome be? Or bringing in doctors who are actually treating patients who are coming to them across state lines, and kind of looking at how we can take not just the good intentions that we know writers have and the high interest and appetite for this right now, but how do we make sure that's really informed by what's actually happening in the world? Because these are good, compelling stories already.
Thank you so much for that. So, let's chat with the showrunners to hear how they're doing their part to depict accurate stories about abortion and reproductive health on television and film. So, Krista Vernoff, I'm going to come to you first. You're the executive producer and showrunner of Grey's Anatomy, which, as Gretchen mentioned, loves abortion, and we love you all for that. We love that you include it as part of storytelling. So, we're wondering, can you talk about your approach as a showrunner and in the writer's room when including abortion in your storylines? And are there any episodes that really resonate with you in particular?
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much. This has been so painfully edifying, even further edifying. Well, our approach always at Grey's Anatomy, it's like we want to tell great stories, we want to entertain, and I always ask the question, what message are we sending with that story? Like, is there a way to entertain and be really dramatic and be really emotional and be really funny and also pay attention to what impact the story is having or what message? So we have a lot of people. We had Gretchen into our room. Did we also have you into our room, Dr. Moyedi? We had I'm going to say
Dr. Daniel Grossman.
I'm going to say we had 7 or 8 OBs and people with organizations like Gretchen's come talk to our writer's room at the beginning of this season to talk about what can we do? How can we help? What can we do? What message? Where can we land? What needs to be said still? So that's where we started, and we got some really good help in terms of just showing that medical abortions are still available and legal in most places and safe. And we're doing a lot. And if I talk too much more about that, it'll become a headline that I'm not prepared to speak to. We've done a lot in the past. We're doing a lot moving forward. Yeah, I mean, I think when you say, are there episodes you could speak to? I think it's worth noticing that when we wrote Christina Yang's abortion, which in season, I don't know, 6 maybe?
Well, 2 was her first attempted, and then later, yes. I think it was
Really?
like 6 or
She had the ectopic.
well, the first,
Yes.
that's when they became where you're my person, but she ended up having the ectopic. I'm a big fan.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's 2 decades of my life. I don't remember, but what I can say is that what I remember vividly are the lengthy fights to have the right to tell those stories. How big those fights were 2 decades ago to let a woman want an abortion for that was the big thing. Christina just didn't want kids. She just didn't want kids. And that was like a scandal, right? Are we protecting that character? Are we going to like her? Those were the conversations 19 seasons ago. So that has blessedly changed. We're not having those fights with the stories that we want to tell now. We're finding a lot of support. I think we have allies in high places at the network and studio at this point.
I love it.
Yeah.
Y'all are doing an amazing job. I love it. Dr. Christina Yang, her trajectory, really, I like saw myself in it, not just the curly hair, but then the abortion, and I was just like, I love it. So thank you for that. Erika, I'm going to come to you. So you're the executive producer of New Amsterdam, which is also a show set in a hospital. And in season 2, I really love this episode. It was called Righteous Right Hand. It was about a young Black woman with Down syndrome, and she learns that she's pregnant and wants an abortion. But her aunt and legal guardian says she can't have one, citing like Black genocide and a lot of misinformation about abortion. And what I loved about this one is that we often don't see characters of color who also have a disability and then they also need abortion. I was like, love this. Can you talk about your approach for that episode and the story that you wanted to tell and how that came to be?
Certainly. We get to choose what we want to talk about at any time on our show, because the series is about systemic issues in healthcare and how to create narratives that make them personalized. And our show takes place in New York at a public hospital that is magical because people can come and then they don't have to pay for things. And, all of those sorts of things happen on the show. But I did want to tell a story about Black women's healthcare from the South. And that's kind of the genesis of this story. I am a Black woman from the South, and there are all sorts of issues that women are facing there because of just a lack of healthcare. But then on top of that, systemic racism that make childbirth, pre-existing conditions for all sorts of other issues a thing. And so it was important to me to show somebody with a different mental capacity, because at that point in time, obviously Roe was still the law of the land. And it was my way to tell a story of other people telling you how you should feel about your own body and how it will be taken care of because you can't take care of yourself. So I didn't know, just how tenuous that was going to turn into the law of the land, really, when I saw it happen this year. But that was sort of my small story about a woman who, she might have a differing mental capacity, but she knows she doesn't want to be pregnant. She doesn't want to have a baby. And she doesn't care if the caretaker is telling her, we'll sort this out. She is a woman of her own mind, and she gets to have that choice. And her aunt understands and comes to that realization herself during the episode. So
I loved it because it was just such a beautiful family conversation, and also addressed a lot of the little things that we hear in our families, people saying little off-putting things, and you're like, that's not maybe true. And also I still get to make this decision. So thank you so much for that. So Paul, can you talk a bit about your screenplay Grandma, which was the thing Gretchen wanted for so long, that abortion road trip, right? It followed a young white woman and her grandmother as they had a road trip to help her obtain an abortion. And would love to know what your approach writing a screenplay, and what did you hope that would come away from Grandma with?
Yeah, so first off, this is really interesting and educational for me, especially what Dr. Moayedi, I hope I pronounced that correctly, was talking about earlier. So the movie came out in 2015. It was revolving around money, actually, in terms of the plot, in that the granddaughter, played by Julia Garner, comes to her grandmother, Lily Tomlin, because she's scheduled an abortion for the end of the day, and has not been able to get the money to pay for it. So she's coming to her to ask for if she has $600 something to pay for this abortion. And the grandmother doesn't, because she's just gotten through paying for a bunch of medical bills for her long-term partner who's died. And she's just cut up all her credit cards. So they need cash over the course of this day. And it's them going on a road trip actually to get the money, hopefully in time to make this appointment. I mean, essentially, I was just trying to stay true to the characters. I did consult with Planned Parenthood and try to be as, I sent them the script and tried to be as accurate as possible, and also tried to be, especially in terms of the older character, Lily Tomlin, I wanted her, I mean, whenever this is a little different, obviously, than the wonderful sort of work that the showrunners have done. But in this case, my collaborator was kind of Lily, and her perspective on really the history of feminism and hence abortion over the last 50 years, because it's revealed over the course of the movie, when they do finally get there, that she has indeed had an abortion, which was an illegal one at the time, and it was very painful for her. And she's then, so actually I had to, in this case, it was a case where they arrive there and she's quite protective of her granddaughter, but is told, no, this is not what you experience. This is quite safe. And and the procedure itself is, it's completely safe and comes off fine. So I'm not even sure kind of like where it came from in terms of the idea occurring to me, but it was very much tied to, in particular, that actress Lily Tomlin, and knowing that she would have so much to say as a gay woman who is experienced from a certain angle, years of feminist history. So I was just trying to stay true to the characters and then stay true to Lily.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's that one. Grandma and Little Woods, Nia DaCosta is another one that's like a road trip and like, how do you get the money? And I'm like, yes, that's actually one of the biggest challenges that people experience when they're trying to get their abortion, and it's often a delay. So thank you so much for showing that. And then I think what's beautiful in so many of the depictions, especially of late, is the sort of the intergenerational or friend familial like abortion storytelling, that people have abortions, we don't exist in a vacuum. One of the things that our storytellers have always said they want to see more of is people who've had abortions showing up for, caring for, and helping other people who have abortions. They want to like make it like the abortion Bechdel test. And my staff, they were like, "What, can we have a person who's having an abortion talk to somebody else who's had an abortion?" That like doesn't always happen. So we get so excited when we see it. So thank you. Before we move to Q&A, which we'll have for about 15 minutes at the very end, so if you have a question, throw it in the chat and then I can ask them. But I'd love to talk to all of you just a little bit about what advice do you have for folks who are on this call listening, who are interested in including abortion or really any other stigmatized healthcare, whether it's using PrEP or HIV or any sort of like infertility, anything that's the stigmatized healthcare experiences, but of course I love abortion. What advice do you have for them about including that? Erika, do you want to go first?
Sure. You don't have to hang a lantern on it, because if you think about your real life and you're talking about things while you're, making a sandwich, it doesn't have to be very important, very special, and people are sitting there having a conversation about this. Because life continues on while you're trying to get the money together for an abortion. Life goes on when you are discussing whether or not you're going to do PrEP with this person. Is this person PrEP worthy? There are all these other sorts of conversations that really, happen when you're having real life happen to you. And so not hanging a lantern on it sometimes is the best way to do it, because then it becomes highly relatable to the person watching it on television.
Awesome. Krista, would you like to go next?
I love Erika's answer. I co-sign. And also, one of the things I always say is that you need the spoonful of sugar to help the medicine. So if you're trying to, if your goal is a certain kind of representation, I'm like, it better be really super funny or really deeply moving. Like, you have to bury the message in humor or heart or character so that people don't feel like they're being preached to. So that it's just a part of a very funny story and accidentally they got some really good information, or they're crying because that character was dying and they loved the sister, but also accidentally they got an education.
I love it. Accidental education. Paul, what's your advice?
Well, I really agree with both what Erika and Krista said. I think that there's all sorts of ways to this is a dramatic way of putting it, but like dehumanize characters or make them unspecific. And certainly there's a temptation. Well, first off, obviously you have to hopefully do your homework and make sure that you're being accurate. I mean, I wanted to make really sure that that was plausible, that they needed that amount was right in terms of right then $600 something to get the procedure. But but also allow the characters to be as idiosyncratic as they would be in any story, and have, you know, don't let the fact that you're dealing in an issue overwhelm the specificity of the characters, I guess, would be what I would advise myself.
I'll say too, can I add a thing?
Go ahead. Yeah, please.
That keeping up with what is useful messaging. Like, I think about when we did the syphilis story on Grey's Anatomy, that was considered, it was like, boy, it was that a huge fight with broadcast standards, that there was a syphilis outbreak among the doctors and nurses. But that was groundbreaking and useful and educational at the time. But if you watch it now, it's really shaming, right? We nicknamed the character Sif Nurse. Like,
Yes.
there's stuff that 20 years later is not useful. And not about that. Do it now. The world has changed. So keeping up with that, like, what is helpful and useful now? Where is the line now? And trying not to cause harm while trying to help. So having people,
I love that.
Gretchen, having people like this panel into the writer's room before you start breaking those stories, not from a place of, we have to get this exactly right, and therefore it's going to be so messagey that it won't be entertaining, but from a place of what's useful, what's helpful, what would be unhelpful. Got it. Thank you. Now I'm going to go make it funny and dramatic and emotional.
I love it. I love it. And also you can replicate real conversations that stigma does exist in the world. And we can also show characters like saying, actually, this is wrong, without being like, you know, overbearing about it. Awesome. So actually, I would love to know, Dr. Moyedi and Dr. Sisson, what are, I know Dr. Sisson, you've answered this a little bit, but some other depictions and things that you would like to see. Do you want to go first, Dr. Sisson, then Dr. Moyedi, and then we'll go to the questions from the audience?
Sure. I mean, I think, well, I'm going to riff off of the last question, actually, because I think it's important to know, like with and I sent the link in the chat to the impact study that we did on an episode of Grey's Anatomy that we worked on in 2019. And I think what's important to know about that was that, like, the scene we were looking at was like 45 seconds long, right? It's not like we had this whole, you know, it's not like they came out with this whole episode that was like a big educational lecture or after school special on abortion care, right? It was this like one interaction between a medical provider and a patient where they talked about medication abortion, how it was, how it worked, what the side effects were going to be, what the follow-up care was. And it was like very much in fitting with the scene and the character and all of their needs, right? So, you know, I loved what Erika said, like, you don't have to hang a land. Like, you can do this in a way that works for your characters. You don't have to let it take over the entire story arc, right? You can get information in there. And if it's coming from a character that people care about, or that people respect and they view as an authority figure, like you can have a significant impact on audiences in like relatively short amounts of content that you're putting out there. And you know, one thing that we've also seen is that abortion disclosures about past abortions, like, you don't need to have a whole episode or multi-episode story arc about making a decision and having an abortion. And then what does that mean for like, you want to do that, great. Like, we do need those too. But like, just having a character that viewers know and care about really deeply, be like, oh, I had an abortion last week in college, you know, years ago, before my child were born, whatever that looks like, that's really meaningful too. And actually a more common experience than someone, you know, right now going through that whole abortion decision, right? Like, people around us every day, all day, have had abortions, and like being able to be candid about that and have a disclosure and model what support looks like around that. Like, that's really easy. It doesn't matter how old your character is or where they've come from or what their background is. Like, everybody's had abortions, and we can kind of make disclosures a really easy way for it to be not a huge story arc, but still a really important moment for bringing that content in. So.
Thank you. Dr. Moyedi, what are your thoughts on like what you'd like to see and advice?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add in addition to what everyone has said, which I completely agree with, is, you know, showing abortion providers as normal people, that not as necessarily saviors or criminals, but just like normal community members that have families and also go to the store and also provide abortion, right? That we are also normal people too, and that really helps to, I mean, continue to normalize the message that people have abortions and people provide abortions, and it's actually just like a Tuesday. It's not a big deal.
I love it. Dr. Moyedi goes to the grocery store.
I go to the grocery store, and it's just a normal thing.
I love it. Okay, so we have a question from the audience. This is the one from Sarah. Do you anticipate an uptick in representation given the current state of affairs? Gretchen, you're nodding. Do you want to?
I mean, yes, we've when we were interviewing writers last year, like, and these were people who both had worked on previous abortion stories and who hadn't, or who had written one that never made it to air. And, and everyone was like, I'm working on, like, now I want to go back to that because I went well last time because it didn't make it to air last. And like everybody is thinking and talking about this, I think. And yes, I expect that there will be an uptick. And, I think what's going to be hard, and I saw the question, like, people are asking me, like, I have a script that's entirely about an abortion, entirely set in an abortion clinic, right? Or I want to do a show that's entirely about an abortion provider. I don't know that those will get made, but everyone will be very skeptical that it will get made until it does, right? At some point we will get that show, right? Hopefully it will be good so that we get more than one season, right? And I'm still like not sure we're going to get a ton of that type of content that is very, very abortion centric. But I also don't know, I would watch that show. Renee, I know you'd watch that show. We'd text while we're watching it because Ghazala can get on the text thread too. But like, what we actually need is shows like abortion people are going to go watch that show, but like, we don't need to be educated or moved, right? Like we can be entertained. That's great too. But like, what we need is the shows that everybody is already watching, figuring out how to make this real for their characters. And I do think that we're going to see a lot more of that.
Thank you. That's Erika.
Oh yeah, although it was shot before all of this happened. The P-Valley episode, which I thought was amazing. The mother was forced to carry a child, and the large storyline for that one episode was her and her 14-year-old daughter that she was forced to have when she was about 14 or 15 years old. Was allowing her the space to make the choice as to whether or not she wanted to then have an abortion because she was not given that choice. And that brought up all sorts of other issues between the two of them. But then on top of that, they're in the Deep South in Mississippi, where they were unable to actually have an abortion. So it had to be a road trip and they had to go somewhere else while they were having this conversation. I think it's really strong and important that you see people who were not given that choice, giving other people that choice, having those arguments. I think it was really wonderfully messy and real in that way.
That quickly went to be one of my favorite depictions because, as you said, it was wonderfully messy and dealt with all of the complications. And also, Mercedes talking about how even though she was forced to continue the pregnancy and parent, and then she had her parental rights taken from her. And so that, just because someone then continues a pregnancy does not mean that they actually have the right to parent, which is one of the tenets of reproductive justice. So I love that depiction. Yes. Anyone else have thoughts before I ask the next question?
I just wanted to say how much I loved the Rami episode. I don't know when it was written as well.
I haven't seen that one yet. Yeah.
Just that, there are really no stories out there with Muslims, people, Middle Eastern, North African people dealing with abortion at all, how well it was dealt with, and showing that complexity between Americanness and diaspora folks. It was very meaningful for me to see that episode.
I can't wait to watch it. I've heard it's very, very good. I just haven't gotten around to watching TV.
I think I tweeted at you about it.
I love it. Awesome. So There's a couple of people have asked some questions around advice about how to pitch these stories centered around abortion to executives and producers who might be apprehensive on the topic. I mean, aside from just like continuing to do it and do it and do it, what advice do you all have?
What advice do we have to people who are apprehensive about approaching abortion as subject matter?
Well, if they have an idea and want to center it, but the executive producers or showrunners that they're working with are apprehensive. So how do they approach them?
I'll say this. I don't think the easiest place to start is I have a comedy set in an abortion clinic. Well, although I have heard that pitch and I've seen a bunch, a bunch of people have come with that idea in a variety of ways. I think that I think that most of us, by the way, that's not to say I saw somebody actually has an abortion clinic comedy and it's probably really funny and maybe you'll get it made. And you're going to have some gangbuster executive producers. You're going to have like Amy Poehler knocking the door down for you to get that made. But to sell a show that's about something else, to let one of the characters be an abortion provider or one of your male characters, the way that Jeremy in The Bear, the lead character goes to Al-Anon meetings sometimes. It's like a C story in the show, but you see him in an Al-Anon meeting. Like, what if you had a character who just took a volunteer shift at an abortion clinic as like, that's what instead of your grocery store scene? Like, I think just normalizing the word abortion has been a big conversation for us this year of like, stop saying reproductive rights, start saying abortion, and seeing people flinch at that. Right? Like this has been so taboo that trying to jump all the way to all of our stories are about abortion, you're going to meet resistance. But there are ways to massage this more into the conversation and more into the conversation until we get the abortion clinic comedy probably a few years from now, is my thought.
Thank you. I love that. Did anyone else want to add to that one? Erika, go ahead.
Well, I think she said it really well. It's eased in. What is the story? Because it's not just about being in an abortion clinic. Is it a workplace comedy? What is the humanity of each of those characters? So if you get at it from, this is a person's understanding of themselves in the world, and you go at it from that. Oh yeah, and by the way, they also are doing that while they're working in an abortion clinic. Then, it's a universal story that people go, oh, okay, I get it. This is a family drama, and the family business happens to be running a clinic or running people across state lines or whatever it is. You lead with the humanity and the narrative of the people, and then they also do this thing that happens all the time. And again, just sort of de-emphasize it and talk about the things that people understand.
I have a question for Erika and Krista, which is, have you had any experience with or known people who have done shows that are financed in a non-traditional way? In other words, sort of independently financed shows? That's my question. And in other words, if there is an idea which is really hard to sell, if there might be some version of that which is purposefully made very inexpensive to make. Have you had any stories of people who are able to get things going like that? I mean, I've met, for instance, some people who claim to be financing, independently financing shows before they're, and then selling them after the fact. So I'm curious whether you've had any knowledge of that.
The only thing I've seen personally, and I've been under big studio deals for a long time, so I don't get to go play in the independent world as much, but the things that I've seen be really successful is like, Issa Rae made a YouTube show that was so great it became Insecure. Or the High Maintenance guys, they made that as a Vimeo show. I remember seeing like 12-minute episodes of it on Vimeo before HBO picked it up. So I haven't heard of independently financed pilots that then just go to series at the networks, but I have heard of people financing their own, showing a sample that is so undeniable that the studios get on board. I don't know about Erika.
Yeah, I mean, I too have been in the studio system, but East Los High, the first season of East Los High was financed and then it was picked up, for example. Other ways, you know, there's a lot of money now out there in other countries. And if they are willing to tackle it and you do whatever the percentage of involvement of, say, Canadians, or however it is seen, if you can do co-productions, you can get money in other countries and then make things happen that way, because a lot of it comes from the government as opposed to from a studio system, to get a pilot made and then come back and go, oh, well, we've got this money, we've got these people, you know, how are you trying to get down with this? And so that is also another way that you can look at it as well.
Awesome. Okay.
Also, if you have shows that are on the air, I don't know who the audience is here totally, but like one of the things that where you can get the representation you want on the TV is like you get some show on the air that's about something completely else, and now it's a hit, and now you can kind of do what you want. You know, like it's you'll have those fights. I'm remembering, by the way, I think it's true, I'm not 100% sure, that we ended up with the ectopic because we lost the fight to do the abortion initially. So then she got pregnant again so we could do the abortion in later years when we had more power. So I just think the back door, when things are this taboo, finding all the backdoor ways in to, you know, we did a very trauma-free abortion on Shameless while I was there. It was one of the writers came in and was like, I just need us to do an abortion where we just show the whole abortion and nobody has an afterthought and nobody has a fight about it and it's just an abortion. And that show is not about abortion, but it's a human character and you know, so that to do it on whatever project you're already doing is a really good thing.
And what I love about the Shameless division is one, it's like over like 5 episodes or something. It's a really long, wonderful arc, and it's at the same time as someone, as her sister's pregnant, making a different decision, which I thought was really, really wonderful. So yeah, awesome. Okay, so we literally have 3 minutes left, and so I'm gonna combine like 2 questions, so there's like 4 questions in the chat, but. So one of them is about what abortion stories are typically missing when portraying those with an anti-abortion perspective. And then the other is like wondering how or if we might represent someone making a choice to not have an abortion and is still supportive of like being pro-choice and reproductive rights. I don't know, Gretchen, you're nodding. Do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, no, I just saw that question. I was thinking that, I mean, I think it's important to remember that people who are opposed to abortion have abortions all the time. And, I mean, I don't know if that's the answer that you're going for necessarily, but I think it's important to remember that people who are opposed to abortions constantly make exceptions for themselves. And it doesn't necessarily change how they feel about abortion politically either. And we have a dark comedy joke in The Office that like the 3 exceptions that anti-abortion people are willing to make are like for rape, incest, and me. Like my abortion is fine. My sister, my daughter, my girlfriend's abortion, like they really need the abortion because they just made a one-time mistake and they're not like all those other sluts in the waiting room, right? Like you have to understand these are special circumstances, right? And so I don't know if that's a positive portrayal or a sensitive portrayal, but I think it's true. And I'm sure Dr. Moayedi could tell us about anti-abortion patients for whom she has provided abortion care. I hear that a lot of times from my physician colleagues. But I do think we've seen examples. So I'm trying to think. Jane the Virgin had a story where Xiomara had to figure out whether and then how to tell her mother she'd had an abortion because she knew her mother would be uncomfortable with it. Same on Unpregnant, where Veronica's mother discovered that she'd had an abortion and needed to help her buy the plane ticket home. And I think that those are moments where people have really modeled what it's like for someone who is personally uncomfortable with abortion to step up for someone. And, you know, I think Veronica's mother has a line where it's basically like, I'll never understand the choice you made, but like, my love for you is more important than all of that. Right. And I think that we have opportunities now to tell stories about how people who have a discomfort with this can still show up for the people in their life. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm going to turn it back over to Enid. Thank you to all of our panelists. You all are amazing. Giving you a little round of applause. I know there's been so many wonderful comments and just like people really loved it. So Enid, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you all for joining. If you missed any part of this conversation, we have recorded it and we will post it on our YouTube channel at a later date. I would love to thank Renee, Erika, Paul, Krista, Dr. Moayedi, Dr. Sisson. Thank you so much for this insightful conversation. We really appreciate it. Thank you all for watching.
Thanks.